everyone. It's good to be back on my video blog. I just came back from Gastech in Singapore, and one of the feedback I got from a number of people was they really enjoy these video blogs and want me to do them more often. So that's my pledge, is to try to do these more often than I used to be in the past. So welcome back, and we have a lot to talk about today. I want to give you some impressions of what I saw at Gastech and kind of where the industry seems to be going. There was a lot going on. There were a lot of people there. Oh my gosh, I think at one point I read the media said there was 30,000 people there at the exhibition. I'm not sure that's the case or not, but there definitely were a lot of people there. So one of the first things I think I noticed was that the hype around the energy transition seems to have subdued a little bit. Maybe we have kind of peaked. I actually saw something on LinkedIn just the other day where someone looked at the IEA report and counted the number of times they mentioned hydrogen in every IEA World Energy Outlook report since I think it was the last 10 years. And this year or last year, it actually went down from the year before. And potentially this year, when the report comes out in a few weeks, it'll go down again. So maybe you've seen kind of the peak of the hype of the hydrogen cycle, which will be good for everyone. There was a hydrogen hall at Gastech. I didn't realize there was a separate hall till I got there the last day, and there wasn't as much buzz as there was around the LNG halls, which I think was good to see. I also read some interesting statistics the other day that the first thing we should actually be doing is converting all the gray and black hydrogen around the world, which is used in refineries and other things. Um, Convert that to blue hydrogen, and if we just do that itself, that'll consume more than 100% of the world's renewable power. So instead of trying to focus on hydrogen for other uses, let's go ahead and use the renewable power. If we all hung up on blue hydrogen, which I guess I'm not, but if they were hung up on that, maybe the first case is actually, instead of trying to find new uses of hydrogen, is to convert the dirty hydrogen that we use today into clean hydrogen. Once we get that over and done with, then we can figure out how to use hydrogen for other uses. But it's very clear to me that whatever I use hydrogen will have, it'll have to be for very local domestic type uses only. So let's talk about what I kind of saw at Gastech. One of the impressions of Gastech. One of the things was there was definitely, for the first time, I think, in our history, we were pointing out what I call the bad actors in our industry. We've never actually done that before. Maybe because we didn't have a lot of bad actors, and maybe because the industry was kind of a cozy little club controlled by a few players, and it's a bit of a gentleman's club. Well, right now, we have a few actors who have kind of disrupted the industry in some ways, and it's causing a bit of angst between the rest of us. We've obviously seen the case. I'm not going to name the company that is not honoring its commissioning cargoes. Now, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we saw Shell go out there and openly criticize them, and other companies will obviously like to do the same. But from their point of view, what did they really do? I mean, look, I'm not justifying it. I think what they did was very wrong. But they also, very early on, under promised the price of gas, price of LNG, and they used a tolling fee that was seemingly unrealistic, and I think it really was. By the time that project CP1, I should have named it, but I guess I did. By the time that project came to commissioning or came to production, the rumors are it was $1 billion over budget. If you're $1 billion over budget, and now you have a position where the market has a spot price that's maybe 5%, 5 times more than your long-term price, what do? Do you go ahead and say, listen, my long-term customers can sue me later, and I'm just going to make up my revenues with the short-term sales on the spot market and maybe save the company from bankruptcy, and deal with the litigation later on? Maybe that's a decision they made. I don't know what the decision was, but the point is, it doesn't bode well for the guys who signed up the long-term cargoes on the premise that they will get these cheap prices, which I think were unrealistic in the first place. So that kind of leads us to another topic about unrealistic price, but we'll come back to that. There's also cases now of projects getting to FID, but really only helping their late investors come in, while throwing the early investors and potentially even their employees under the bus. Every time a new investor comes into a capital structure, you potentially dilute all the other investors before that. You have to be very careful how you do that, because the early investors took the risk, and they're the ones that will actually get most diluted every time there is a new event where you bring in a new investor. You have to honor that, or the first investor that took the plunge, and your employees that are probably based on a lot of stock options. If you literally throw them under the bus to get your project across to FID, have you really done the right thing? You may have, the later investors may have been rewarded by coming in late, but it's not so good for the early investor. So I'm obviously trying to raise early investment money for my project. I pledge not to do those kind of games. I want to make sure that everybody is well respected for the risk and reward that they take. And I think in the past we have done that. Companies and investors have made a lot of money on LNG projects. Cheniere is a great example, Freeport, others, where investors have done very, very well. But if we have more and more players that basically, do the deal at the very end and really hurt some of the early investors, that doesn't help the rest of us trying to get our projects going off the ground. So that's a good segue into kind of price expectations. We have, whether we like it or not, we're in a world where inflation has been very high. Costs have gone up dramatically. Now, in my own personal view, and I don't have any basis for saying this, it seems that some of the engineering companies may be raising their prices more than their costs may justify, because I'm hearing of cost, now increases of 30, 40, 50%, and I don't think inflation was that high. But it is what it is, that the costs have gone up. And I'm quite surprised when I talked to potential buyers last week at Gastech, that the buyers are still really haven't come to terms with all this. They're still kind of based on their, oh, we think American gas should be at the 250 or $2 tolling fee. Well, I think those days are behind us. And I also find it a bit disingenuous. We have been in the last 12 months seeing how prices have gone up literally from, the single digits or the low teens to $50, $60 on the spot market. And yet, a lot of the buyers are still concerned about whether they paid 25 cents too much for their tolling fee. We have to be realistic, the fact that there just are not that many new projects coming, and the projects that are out there have really struggled to get to FID. If it was such a lucrative business, they would have got to FID a lot easier. So the buyers, I think, are a little bit spoiled with some of the promises that were made by some companies a couple of years ago that proved to be wrong. They actually came out, the costs were a lot higher, and those prices cannot be matched, and that's why we have the litigation today. But in the end of the day, I think there has to be a meeting of the minds. If the buyers need gas and the sellers want to sell gas and develop new projects, there has to be a price that works for everybody. And I think that we are not there yet. There's still a bit of an angst on both sides of how to do this. But I think we'll get there, because in the end of the day, the world supply demand balance is pretty tight. All we have seen is, the threat of strikes in Australia, which maybe the strikes have started now, and the prices around the world are jumping around. So we are on a razor's edge. One can argue there's a lot of new projects coming. There's a lot of expansions coming. One thing I noticed at Gastech was there was not a lot of people like me promoting brand new greenfield projects anywhere in the world. We see a lot of expansions happening and a few small greenfield FLNG type projects around the world, but really not a lot of things that are going to move the needle. Quietly this last week, we saw Northwest Shelf in Australia drop another train because of lack of gas. That's happening in many parts of the world. We only see the headlines about new trains coming online, like the train in Tangguh in Indonesia. But there's a lot of projects that are also struggling to keep up the production because the reserves are falling, et cetera, et cetera. So we are in an interesting space, like we always are. The world is still depending on LNG. I see LNG kind of, we have moved beyond the hype of the energy transition stuff a little bit, and people are realizing that gas is still the best source of energy transition fuel. We've demonized gas for the last few years, much to our detriment. That demonization is actually really making it difficult for people like me trying to raise money, because a lot of the people that would go to ask for equity funding have now, their rules in the corporate rules that after 2030 or whatever the number happens to be, they have to be net zero. It's very hard to reconcile being net zero and investing in a greenfield LNG project. But in the end of the day, we know that LNG is not going away anytime soon. And in fact, let's just talk about energy transition for a minute. We have, quote unquote, transitioning away from coal for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and now we are transitioning away from oil. but we still use more coal now than ever before. In fact, I read a really interesting statistic the other day. China has approved more coal-fired power stations in the last year or so, I guess, than are operating in the US today. So even if we retire all the coal-fired power stations in the US today, it'll only make up for the new coal-fired power stations that China is going to commit to. And we have, quote, transitioned from coal a long time ago. If that's the experience that we've had from coal, we're going to have a much harder experience transitioning away from gas. Gas is going to be here for a long, long time, and we need to continue investing. These reports that I think the IEA or somebody came up the other day, and the UN is saying, oh, we just stop investing in fossil fuels. Very, very detrimental. It's not going to help the world, and it's not going to help the poorer parts of the world. The poor parts of the world are not going to pick up fancy liquid hydrogen or wind and all this other stuff. Look at the wind power everywhere. These unrealistic expectations and assumptions that costs are miraculously going to keep on coming down. Supply chains are going to keep on producing and everything's going to get cheaper and cheaper. Well, that's falling flat on its face, isn't it? I mean, we have seen more wind projects probably canceled in the last few months than even being proposed. Probably that's true. So I think we have to continue to invest in alternate energy. Absolutely, we should be doing that just for the sake of keeping the innovation and the prices and the source of supply diversified. But don't kid ourselves that we're going to switch miraculously from gas away to something else anytime soon. And if we're not going to do that switch, and that switch could last 10, 20, 30 years of transitioning like we see for coal, then we better be investing in gas supply. We can invest in, I see a lot of investment in gas, regas, and import. I don't see enough in gas supply. Um, and so, I think that, it's, I'm still trying to raise money for my new project, Gulfstream LNG. I think it could be the last permittable site on the US Gulf Coast. I think onshore Gulf is always going to be cheaper than FLNG. There's a lot of hype as well at Gastech about FLNG. I think almost a little bit too much. FLNG has been around a long, long time. Yes, there's been some incredibly good successes lately. We cannot forget the massive, failure, of course, from Prelude, still lingering with us today. People forget that the FLNG has pros and cons. Of course, the pro is it's in a shipyard. The cons is you got to wait for the shipyard crew. We have shown that the permitting is really not that much quicker, FLNG versus not FLNG, but the OPEX is going to be a lot higher. There's no way you can justify to me that flying a maritime crew on helicopters off to 50 miles off the Lake Louisiana coast for one of the projects that's being proposed is going to be cheaper than folks who can drive in from New Orleans for 1 hour and work on the plant or maintain the plant or whatever they have to be. FLNG had limitations. You can't store the LNG as much. You have ship, weather windows. You have to have a full marine crew. You need ship-to-ship transfers. There's a lot of things that have to get overcome. We shouldn't force FLNG solutions everything. And also, let's be honest, FLNG implies the ship is going to be built in a shipyard. Shipyards, especially the LNG shipyards, are very, very busy building a lot of big LNG carriers. So the guarantee that you'll get your ship built on time and on budget, it may be questionable as well. So anyway, I've kind of gone all over the place today, but I'm hoping to put these videos out a lot more often. And please come back. And I hope you like my new intro, little snazzy video that I'm trying to rebrand this thing a little bit. But I hope you enjoyed. Keep the comments coming, and please do share the video. Thanks.